The termination letter was 4 sentences long. It cited a single violation: unauthorized interaction with restricted equipment in the secondary reactor control room. It was signed by the facility director and time-stamped 11:47 on a Tuesday morning, and it was slid across a table to a man who read it once, folded it in half along the existing crease, and placed it in the front pocket of his work shirt without a word. His name was on the letter. It was also on the reactor, not on a plaque, not on, a nameplate. In the engineering index buried in the facility's technical archive, the original design documentation for the Callaway Nuclear Generating Station's secondary coolant management system. The name on page 1 of the primary authorship field was Nathan Cole, the man who had just been handed that letter. He stood up. He thanked the HR director for her time. He asked if he could finish the hallway on the east wing before he left, because he had started it that morning, and he preferred, to leave things complete. She said that would not be necessary. He nodded. He picked up his mop and walked to the supply room, returned his equipment to its correct position on the rack, and signed out at the front desk at 11:53. His daughter was at school. He had 6 hours before pickup. He drove home and made lunch. The Callaway Nuclear Generating Station sat on the eastern edge of a mid-sized city that had been built around its industry and was slowly learning to exist without it. The plant, itself, was functional and aging in the particular way that large infrastructure ages, not failing, but accumulating the weight of deferred decisions, each one individually defensible and collectively significant. It employed 412 people across 3 operational divisions, and it produced enough power to run 200,000 homes, and it had not made regional news in 11 years, which in the nuclear energy business was the definition of success. The facility director, was a woman named Patricia Holt. She had held the position for 3 years, appointed after a restructuring that had followed a change in the parent company's regional leadership. She was 49 years old, precise in her thinking, careful in her communication, and had spent her career in energy administration rather than engineering. She understood the plant in the way that a person who has studied a language understands it fluently enough for most conversations, with the occasional gap, that reveals the difference between study and immersion. She had inherited the janitorial staff along with everything else. She had not reviewed their files. Nathan Cole had been on the custodial roster at Callaway for 3 years. He was listed under his position as Environmental Services Technician Level 2. His personnel file noted a satisfactory performance rating across 6 consecutive quarterly reviews, 0 disciplinary incidents prior to Tuesday, and an emergency contact his mother, Eleanor Cole, listed at a Millhaven address 14 miles east of the plant. What the personnel file did not contain, because no one had thought to ask, and Nathan had not offered, was anything about the 11 years that had preceded his arrival at Callaway. Nathan Cole was 37 years old. He had grown up in Millhaven, in the house his mother still occupied, with the fig tree in the backyard and the particular quiet of a neighborhood that asked nothing dramatic of the people who lived, in it. He had been good at mathematics in the way that certain people are good at it, not as a performance of intelligence, but as a natural language, the way some people hear music and things that others hear only as sound. He had gone to MIT on a merit scholarship at 17. He had completed a dual degree in nuclear engineering and applied physics in 4 years. He had joined the faculty research program for 2 additional years, working under a senior engineer named Dr. Harold Marsh, Work on passive coolant management in pressurized water reactors was considered foundational in the field. At 23, he had been recruited by Callaway's parent company, Continental Energy Systems, as a junior design engineer. By 28, he was the lead systems engineer on the secondary coolant management project, the most technically significant infrastructure upgrade in Callaway's 30-year operational history. The project had taken 4 years. It had come in under budget, ahead of schedule, which in large-scale nuclear infrastructure was not a distinction anyone described as minor. The system Nathan had designed was still running. It ran every day, quietly and correctly, in the secondary control room that Nathan was no longer permitted to enter. He had left Continental Energy at 31. His wife Diane had been diagnosed when their daughter Maya was 8 months old, and he had spent the following 18 months doing what the work required of him and being, or absent for what mattered more. And one morning he had looked at the numbers on his screen and understood with the particular clarity of a man trained to identify the moment a system reaches a critical threshold that the system currently reaching that threshold was not on his monitor. He had resigned the following week. Continental had offered a leave of absence. He had declined. They had offered a reduced role. He had declined. They had asked what it would take. He had said nothing because the answer was not a thing they could offer. He had moved back to Millhaven. He had moved into a house 8 blocks from his mother. He had found a part-time position at Callaway's custodial department through a contractor listing because the schedule was predictable, the work was physical, and the plant was close enough to Maya's school that he could manage pickup without a second car. He had been mopping floors in a building that ran on his work for 3 years. He had not told anyone. The one person at Callaway who knew was Walt Garber. Walt was the senior facilities supervisor, 61 years old, with the measured calm of a man who had seen enough things go wrong in enough buildings to have stopped being surprised by what he found in unexpected places. He had processed Nathan's hiring paperwork himself and had looked at the employment history section for a long moment before setting it down. Continental Energy Systems, lead systems engineer, Callaway Secondary Coolant Project. He, had looked at the man sitting across from him with the worn jacket and the careful hands and had said nothing for a moment. Then he had asked one question. He asked why. Nathan had said his daughter needed someone who came home. Walt had hired him before the sentence finished. He had not mentioned the file to anyone because Nathan had not asked him to keep it private and had not asked him to share it, and Walt had decided in that moment that the choice of what to do with a person's history belonged to that person and to no one else. For 3 years he had kept that decision. The incident that generated the termination letter had occurred at 10:14 on a Tuesday morning. Nathan had been cleaning the corridor outside the secondary control room when the warning light above the door had begun cycling not the emergency red of an active fault, but the amber of a system flag, the kind that indicated an anomaly the monitoring software had detected and categorized but not yet resolved. He, had seen that light before. He had designed the system that produced it. He knew what amber on that particular panel at that particular time of the operational cycle meant. It was not dangerous. It was the preliminary signal of a calibration drift in the secondary loop pressure sensor, a predictable occurrence in the 3rd year of the sensor array's operational life that the original design documentation had specifically addressed in Appendix C, Section 4. He knew what it meant because he had, written Appendix C. He had opened the door. He had gone to the panel. He had made 2 adjustments, both documented in the original maintenance protocol, both within the authorized correction parameters, and he had left. The adjustment had taken 4 minutes. The amber light had stopped. The security camera in the secondary control room had recorded all of it, and the footage had been reviewed by the shift supervisor, who had forwarded it to Patricia Holt with a note that flagged the unauthorized access. Patricia had called legal, then HR, then Walt. Walt had said very little during that call. He had listened. He had said he understood. He had ended the call and sat at his desk for a long time before walking to the corridor where Nathan was finishing the east wing floor. He had not been able to tell him what was coming before it came. He had not known how. The HR director's name was Susan Bright. She was thorough, professional, and genuinely uncomfortable with what she had, been asked to do, though she performed the discomfort in the way that people perform it when they have decided the discomfort does not change the outcome. She had slid the letter across the table. Nathan had read it. She had waited for the response that people in her experience usually produced at this moment: the argument, the protest, the negotiation. Nathan had folded the letter and placed it in his pocket and asked about the East Wing. She had not known what to do with that. She had said, the East Wing would be handled. She had watched him stand and pick up his equipment and leave with the same unhurried attention he brought to every task in the building, and she had sat with the folder in front of her for several minutes after the door closed, not reviewing it, simply sitting. Patricia received the confirmation of the termination at noon. She reviewed the security footage one more time. She watched the man in the gray custodial uniform enter the restricted area, move to panel, make 2 adjustments that she could not technically evaluate, and leave. She watched the amber light stop. She noted that he had known exactly where to go. She noted that his movements at the panel had been unhurried and precise, without the exploratory quality of someone encountering unfamiliar equipment. She noted that the light had stopped within 4 minutes. She filed these observations in the part of her mind where she kept things that were adjacent to conclusions she had not yet reached, and she moved on to the afternoon's agenda. Maya Cole was 6 years old. She had her father's stillness and her mother's laugh, which she produced rarely and completely, a full-body event that her grandmother described as the best sound in the house. She attended the school 4 blocks from her grandmother's address, and she spent her afternoons at her grandmother's kitchen table doing her homework with the focused determination of a child who had decided that doing things correctly was, not a burden but a form of respect for the people who had taught her how. She had a stuffed owl named Galileo who sat on the corner of her father's workbench in the spare room at home during school hours, positioned carefully, facing the window. Nathan picked her up at 3:15. He told her on the walk home that he had a new situation at work and that things were going to look a little different for a while. Maya asked if different meant bad. He said it meant different. He said that, different and bad were not the same thing, and that the distinction was important, and she should remember it. She said okay. She asked if they were still having pasta for dinner. He said yes. She said okay and took his hand, and they walked the rest of the way home without further discussion of the matter, which was, Nathan understood, one of the many ways in which his daughter was wiser than her age. That evening, after Maya was asleep, Nathan sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad and wrote 3 columns of notes in the precise, unhurried hand of someone who was not reacting but calculating. The first column was a list of facts as they existed. The second column was a list of what those facts implied. The third column was a list of what he intended to do, organized by sequence and dependency, the way he had always organized complex problems, not by urgency but by logic, each action positioned relative to the ones that had to precede it. He wrote for 40 minutes. He reviewed what he had written. He made 2 small revisions. He folded the legal pad to the first blank page, capped his pen, and went to bed. He had not written anything in the third column that involved anger, not because he did not feel it. He did, in the specific way that a person feels it when an institution demonstrates that it does not know what it has, but because anger was not a useful variable in the kind of calculation he was running. He had spent 11 years learning, that precision mattered more than force. He was about to demonstrate it one more time. What Nathan had not mentioned to anyone, not to Walt, not to his mother, not to the legal pad on his kitchen table, was what he had seen in the 4 minutes he had spent at the secondary control panel. He had gone in to correct the pressure sensor calibration. He had corrected it, and while his hands were on the panel, he had seen something else, something that had nothing to do with the amber light, something that lived 2 levels deeper in the system's diagnostic display, visible only to someone who knew what they were looking for and what it meant when they found it. A thermal asymmetry in the primary loop's secondary interface, small, consistent, the kind of variance that fell within the automated monitoring system's acceptable range and would therefore never trigger an alert. The kind of variance that Nathan recognized because he had written the parameters for the automated monitoring, system, and he had written them for normal operational conditions, not for the specific configuration the plant had been running since a maintenance modification 14 months earlier. In the original design, the asymmetry was nothing. In the current configuration, the asymmetry was the early signature of a stress accumulation in the interface, coupling a component that was not scheduled for inspection for another 4 months. He knew what 4 months meant. He had run the numbers on the walk, to his car. He had not reported it, not because he didn't intend to, because he had been fired before he could file the report through official channels, and the moment his access card was deactivated, his ability to enter the system documentation portal had been deactivated with it. He had 1 week, maybe 10 days before the asymmetry crossed the threshold from early signature to active concern, and he was no longer an employee. He was a man with a legal pad and 11 years of institutional knowledge and a daughter who was asking about pasta. The person Nathan called was not a lawyer. It was Dr. Harold Marsh. Harold was 71 years old, retired from active research for 4 years, living in a house in Vermont that he had described as deliberately inconvenient to reach. He answered on the second ring because he always answered on the second ring and had done so for as long as Nathan had known him, which was 20 years. Nathan told him about the termination, Harold said. Or nothing. Nathan told him about the thermal asymmetry. Harold said nothing for longer. Then Harold asked one question. He asked what the current coupling inspection interval was. Nathan told him. Harold was quiet for a full 10 seconds. Then he said the word that Nathan had already said to himself on the walk to his car, the word that neither of them needed to elaborate on because they both understood the architecture of what it described. He said, timeline. Nathan gave him the numbers. Harold, said he would make a call. He said Nathan should document everything he had seen, in full technical detail, dated and time-stamped, and have it ready within 24 hours. He said to send it to no one until Harold told him who to send it to. Nathan said he understood. He went back to the legal pad. Patricia Holt received a call at 8:15 the following morning. It was from the office of the Regional Nuclear Regulatory Commission director. She was told that a technical concern had been, raised regarding the Callaway facility by a credentialed source with direct design knowledge of the secondary coolant system. She was told that the concern was being reviewed at the federal level and that an NRC technical team would be on site within 48 hours. She was told the name of the credentialed source. She sat at her desk after the call and looked at the wall in front of her for a long moment. Then she called Walt. Walt came to her office and sat down. She told him what she had, just been told. She told him the name. Walt looked at her with the particular expression of a man who has been keeping a piece of information for 3 years and has just watched it become relevant in a way he had hoped it would not need to be. She asked him if he knew. He said yes. She asked how long. He said since the beginning. She asked why he hadn't told her. He said very carefully and without accusation that she had never asked. She sat with that for a moment. Then she asked Walt to pull, Nathan Cole's original personnel file, the full one, not the custodial intake form, and bring it to her. Walt said he would need to make a call first. She said she understood. The NRC technical team arrived on Thursday morning. They were 4 people, 2 senior reactor engineers, a systems inspector, and a documentation specialist. They had driven from the regional office and arrived with the particular efficiency of people who had been briefed on the way and did not need to be oriented. They were met in the lobby by Patricia and her operations director and the plant's chief engineer, a man named Robert Fenn, who had been at Callaway for 19 years and who had reviewed Nathan's original design documentation as part of his onboarding and had thought about it perhaps twice since. The lead NRC engineer asked to be taken directly to the secondary control room. Robert Fenn took them. The lead engineer looked at the primary loop interface panel for approximately 90 seconds. Then he, turned to Robert and asked a question about the maintenance modification from 14 months prior. Robert answered it. The lead engineer looked at his colleague. Something passed between them in the way that information passes between 2 people who have just confirmed a shared concern. He asked to see the coupling inspection records. In the kitchen of a house 8 blocks from Eleanor Cole's address, Nathan was making breakfast. Maya was at the table with Galileo positioned on the corner of, her placemat, watching her father with the calm assessment of a child who had decided to catalog the ways in which her father was different from other people's fathers and had been adding to the list for as long as she could remember. She said, "Dad, are you going back to the plant?" He set a plate in front of her. He said he didn't know yet. She said, "Did they figure out you built it?" He looked at her. She said she had heard him talking to the man on the phone and that some of it had been words. She didn't know, but that the part she understood was that the plant had a problem and her dad knew how to fix it. He sat down across from her. He said yes. He said that was approximately correct, she said. "Are you going to fix it?" He said he was working on that. She considered this with the gravity it deserved. Then she picked up her fork and said that he should, because he was good at fixing things, and that it would be a waste not to. He looked at his daughter. He said he agreed. The NRC, team's preliminary assessment confirmed the thermal asymmetry. It confirmed, specifically, that the variance Nathan had identified fell within the original monitoring parameters, but outside the safe operating range for the modified configuration, a distinction the plant's automated systems had not been programmed to recognize because the modification had been implemented without a corresponding update to the monitoring threshold. The lead engineer filed an immediate technical advisory. Coupling inspection was moved up by 4 months and completed within 72 hours. The inspection found early-stage stress fatigue in the interface coupling consistent with Nathan's projection, at a stage that was fully correctable with a targeted component replacement. The replacement took 11 hours. The plant remained operational throughout. No public notification was required. No event was recorded in the Federal Incident Database. What had been caught was not a disaster. It was the thing that happens before a disaster, in the window when the mathematics are still on the side of the people paying attention. Nathan had been paying attention. The lead NRC engineer's report, filed 6 days after the team's arrival, contained a section on the identification of the concern. It noted that the asymmetry had been observed during an unauthorized access event by a terminated custodial employee. It noted the employee's name. It noted his original design credentials and his authorship, of the secondary coolant system. And it noted that the access, while procedurally unauthorized, had resulted in the identification of a safety-relevant condition that the plant's automated monitoring systems had not flagged and would not have flagged within the relevant time frame. The report used the word fortunate. It used it once, in the final paragraph, and it was the kind of word that in NRC documentation carried the full weight of everything it was not saying directly. Patricia Holt read, the report in full on a Friday morning. She read it twice. Then she pulled the folder that Walt had brought her, Nathan Cole's complete professional record, assembled from the Continental Energy Systems archive through a request that had taken 3 days to process. She read that too. MIT Applied Physics, Nuclear Engineering, Dr. Harold Marsh's research program, Continental Energy Systems, lead engineer, Callaway Secondary Coolant Project, 4 years, under budget, ahead of schedule, 14, patents filed during those years, all under his name, 3 of them directly relevant to components currently operating inside Callaway. She turned to the last page of the folder. The reason for departure from Continental. Personal. No performance issues noted. Departure described by supervising director as a significant loss to the organization. She closed the folder. She looked at the wall in front of her, at the framed operational charter of the Callaway facility, at the mission statement, printed in clean institutional type. Then she called Walt and asked him to reach Nathan Cole. Nathan was in the spare room when Walt called. He was at the workbench, not working on anything specific, simply maintaining cleaning tools, checking calibration on a small piece of equipment he kept for personal projects, moving through the familiar physical logic of a space that he had organized the way he organized everything, precisely, and with complete attention to function. Galileo was on the corner of the bench facing the window. Walt told him that Patricia Holt would like to meet with him. He said it was her request, her schedule, and that she had specified that it would be at a time and location of Nathan's choosing. Nathan was quiet for a moment. He asked how the coupling inspection had gone. Walt said it had gone as Nathan had projected. Nathan said he was glad. Walt said everyone was glad. He said it with the particular dryness of a man who understood the full weight of what, had almost not happened. Nathan said he could meet on Monday morning. Walt said he would pass that along. After the call, Nathan sat on the stool at the workbench for a while. He was not reviewing the meeting in advance. He was not rehearsing what he would say. He was thinking about Diane and the way she had always said that the things worth doing were almost never announced before they were finished. He thought she would have found this particular sequence of events quietly satisfying. He, thought she would have had something precise and accurate to say about it. He thought, not for the first time, that he wished she could have said it. Patricia Holt had suggested her office. Nathan had said the cafeteria. She had agreed without asking why, though if she had asked, the answer would have been simple. He had eaten lunch in that cafeteria for 3 years. It was a room that did not belong to anyone's authority. It was a room that was simply a room. She was already there when he, arrived. She was sitting at a table near the window with 2 cups of coffee and no aid, no folder, no prepared documentation. Just herself and the coffee in the particular posture of a woman who had decided before she arrived that she was not going to manage this conversation. Nathan sat across from her. He wrapped his hands around the cup and waited. She said she had read the NRC report. She said she had read his full personnel file. She said she understood now what she had not known 3 years ago and had not known last Tuesday and had, she acknowledged directly, not made any effort to know. She said the termination had been procedurally correct and substantively wrong, and that she could explain the distinction if he wanted the explanation, but that she suspected he already understood it and that she was not going to offer the explanation as a substitute for accountability. Nathan said he understood the distinction. She said she wanted to discuss 2 things. The first was termination. The second was what came after it. She said the termination would be formally reversed. She said the personnel record would reflect a departure rather than a dismissal. She said the documentation would be corrected by end of business Friday. Nathan said he appreciated that. Then she said the second thing. She said Continental Energy's parent company had been in contact with her office since the NRC report was filed. She said they were conducting a full review of the secondary, or coolant system documentation, which had surfaced the 14 patents and the original design credentials and what she described carefully as the full picture of Nathan's professional history. She said they had asked her to make an inquiry. She slid a folder across the table. He looked at it. He did not open it. She said it was a consulting proposal, a senior technical advisory role on the facility's next infrastructure cycle, a 4-year project, beginning the following quarter, focused on the primary loop interface system upgrade that the NRC report had identified as the next priority. She said the role was structured around his schedule. She said it required his knowledge and not his presence at any particular hour. She said they understood he had a daughter in school and that the proposal had been written to reflect that understanding. She said one other thing. She said she owed him an acknowledgement that was separate from the proposal and should not be connected to it, she said. Or, she had run a facility for 3 years without knowing what was in it. She said that was her failure and not one she intended to frame as anyone else's. She said, "You corrected a calibration in 4 minutes that my team had not identified in 14 months. You identified a structural concern on your way out of a building that had just fired you, and you reported it through proper channels without using it as leverage for your own situation." She paused. She said, "I want to understand how a person does that." Nathan looked at his coffee for a moment. Then he said, "My daughter asked me if I was going to fix it." Patricia looked at him, he said. She said it would be a waste not to. He said that was the entire calculation. Patricia sat with that for a long moment. Then she looked out the cafeteria window at the plant floor visible through the glass, the clean industrial expanse of a building that ran on principles its current leadership had received without fully understanding their origin. She looked back at Nathan. She said, "Will you open the folder?" He opened it. He read it with the focused, unhurried attention he brought to any document that carried consequences, not quickly, not slowly, but at the pace the material required. He turned each page fully before moving to the next. He made no expressions that commented on what he found. When he finished, he closed the folder. He said he would need to think about it. He said he had a pickup at 3:15 and that Maya, had a school project he had promised to help with this week. Patricia said she understood. She said there was no deadline on the response. He stood. He picked up the folder. He looked at her once more with the complete, direct attention that she had seen. She now understood in the security footage from the secondary control room. The same quality of presence, the same absence of performance, he said. The thermal monitoring thresholds in sections 3 and 7 of the current protocol need to, be updated before the next maintenance cycle, not for the upgrade, for now. I'll send the revised parameters to Walt. She said she would make sure they were implemented. He nodded. He walked out of the cafeteria. She sat at the table with the empty coffee cups and the window and the plant floor beyond it and the particular stillness of a person who has just finished revising something important and is not yet ready to move on from the revision. Maya was waiting at the school gate at, 3:15 with Galileo tucked under one arm and her backpack pulling slightly to the left because she had packed it with 3 library books and had not distributed the weight correctly, a fact she had noticed and decided to tolerate for reasons of her own. She looked up when Nathan came through the gate. She said, "Did you fix it?" He took the backpack from her and redistributed the books without being asked, settling it back on her shoulders with the practiced efficiency of someone who had, performed this adjustment approximately 400 times. He said, "It's being fixed," she said. "Did they say sorry?" He said yes. She thought about this for a moment with the careful judicial seriousness she brought to questions of fairness. Then she said, "Was it a good sorry or a because they had to sorry?" He looked at his daughter. He said, "It was because they finally understood sorry." She considered this categorization. She appeared to find it acceptable. She took his hand and they walked, down the street in the late afternoon light, past the fig tree in her grandmother's backyard, past the house on the corner with the broken fence that Nathan had been meaning to mention to the owner, through the neighborhood that had asked nothing dramatic of either of them and had received, in return, the kind of quiet and consistent attention that certain people bring to everything they touch. In the spare room at home, Galileo sat on the corner of the workbench, facing the window, waiting for the sound of the door. In the folder on the kitchen table, the consulting proposal sat open to the page with the project overview, a 4-year infrastructure cycle at a plant whose secondary coolant system was already running, quietly and correctly, on the work of the man who was now walking his daughter home.